innovative companies right here in Brooklyn. People doing applications of technology for a number of different usage. Today, we are going to continue along that path. I have a guest, Mr. Abduz Muwwakkil, who is the Chief Quality Officer for MemoryMD, which is a subsidiary of Brain Scientific. Abduz, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you, Alfonso. Pleasure.
Good. Tell us about your company, just a little bit about MemoryMD, how did it come about, what you guys do.
Sure. So MemoryMD comes from the vision of being able to identify and diagnose neurological conditions. The first beginnings of MemoryMD started back in 2004 in collaboration with NYU. The original concept was to be able to identify Alzheimer's as early as possible. And that was done by using EEG equipment in addition to cognitive testing and some other types of diagnostics such as blood testing to essentially, if you're able to accumulate a certain amount of data, maybe 50,000 participants, you could start looking at correlations in the data and using machine learning algorithms to automate and detect certain conditions or characteristics that probably a physician wouldn't see just looking at the data with their own eyes. And so the results were decent to the point where some of the detection of certain types of Alzheimer's were being done 4 to 5 years in advance.
Okay.
So that was the success. The challenges were the difficulty in using before specialized EEG equipment that was bulky, that costs upwards of $20,000 to $30,000, as well as needing specialized technicians to apply the EEGs, all limited really the data collection efforts and made it very expensive, and really made it so that you couldn't scale the study and repeat it, which was the whole point. So the founder of the company essentially decided to start making their own EEG products, and that really culminated in us developing 2 products, EEG cap and an EEG amplifier.
That's NeuroCap and the NeuroEEG.
Correct.
Okay.
So I'll start with NeuroEEG and then I'll kind of end with NeuroCap.
Okay.
So NeuroEEG is basically a pocket-size phone, essentially. It fits in the palm of your hand, and essentially the electrical activity that's going on in our brains, the firing of neurons, it's happening at a constant rate. When your eyes are open, your brain's firing neurons, which is electrical activity. What you can do is, with an amplifier, once you pick up that signal, you need to essentially amplify the signal because it's so small.
Exactly.
So that's what the amplifier essentially does, and what it also does is the Bluetooth chip inside the device is able to transmit that EEG data to a computer remotely. So that's kind of the advantage. It's being able to amplify these small signals and then being able to wirelessly send that data to a computer. Typical traditional EEG systems are you have to use a wire, which makes it difficult in a hospital setting to apply it, etc. Now, the other piece to it was actually, well, how do you get that signal from that person's head? So that's what the NeuroCap is. It's a 19-channel disposable EEG headset. It has, essentially it's a flexible circuit board.
Mm-hmm.
And in that flexible circuit board, we have embedded circuitry that connects to electrodes at various locations. Those locations are essentially based off of a 1020 standard, which is an international standard that allows for, if I run an EEG in Norway, I can be confident that an EEG ran in New Jersey is going to be the same.
Is this an actual example of the cap?
Yeah, so this is an example of the cap here. You can see that each location, there's 4 lobes to the brain, the frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobe.
Right.
And then there's numbers marked for each one of those coordinates. On the left side, you'll notice there's all odd numbers. On the right side, there's all even numbers. So there's over 256 different locations for the EEG. this cap only focuses on 19 channels.
Okay.
But those 19 channels are spread out in a way that gives us kind of a good full map of the brain, so we can make sure we're hitting all the important lobes. And so what we have is actually connected to the electrode on the other side is a sponge. And so the sponge actually holds a gel.
Right.
And that gel is essentially a conductive medium that you need to conduct electrical signal.
Okay.
And the electrodes pick up that activity, travels all the way down through the leads. We have a cable that connects to the amplifier. That data gets on the amplifier, and we're able to send it to a computer.
Okay.
Once it's on the computer, we have a basic software. The neurologist can look at the data in real time and say, okay, I'm seeing abnormal activity, etc. And also, once it's on the computer, that data can be put onto a network server, HIPAA compliant, and that's when you can start sending data remotely, computer to computer, location to location. And so this type of functionality allows us to essentially expand the application of EEG.
Actually, it's doing the same as a regular EEG, but using a much smaller scale machinery or technology.
Yeah, more lightweight. We try to make it more comfortable, lower the costs, make it simpler to apply. So yeah, it's same as a typical EEG, just improved in terms of product performance, essentially.
Okay. In doing this, what was the target population that you guys were looking at?
Yeah. So the first target population was really Alzheimer's patients.
Okay. Yeah.
So I guess seniors who are, exhibiting, preliminary memory loss, or sleep issues. That's your typical population. But the bread and butter of EEG today is really patients experiencing seizures. That's really the main indications of use for an EEG device, because with a seizure you have what's known as epileptic spike activity or even slowing activity, and those are when your actual neurons are almost like short-circuiting, essentially.
Sure.
But that short-circuiting creates a certain discharge that you can pick up with an EEG device.
Yeah. Right. So that's, how about with people with concussions?
Yeah, so outside of the seizure market and Alzheimer's, that's the bread and butter. But the ability to have a simpler form factor that can be applied by a nurse or a nurse practitioner or, even someone from administrative billing, that's how simple we're trying to make this product.
Okay.
It allows us to look at other clinical applications that were previously, essentially restricted to being able to access this type of technology. So we've initiated back in 2017 a clinical study with Virginia Tech looking at their Division I NCAA athletes and measuring baseline EEGs as well as post-concussive effects of the
That's a huge market in terms of collegiate football and I guess other sports, but also because currently now, if I'm a football player and I'm injured on the field, they would look at me and see if I'm wobbly, I have balance, or my vision is, and they would, based on blurred, and they would determine if I had a concussion or not. And then an EEG is more precise in that diagnosis. Am I correct, or more sensitive to disruption in brain activity?
Yeah, the EEG is very sensitive. It has a high sensitivity to brain injury or abnormal activity. The challenge is that it doesn't have such a high specificity.
Okay.
So what that means is the EEG can probably tell you something's wrong, but it might not be able to tell you what exactly is wrong.
Exactly, I got you.
But with that said, the EEG can be a sensitive biomarker for concussion. There's just, a lot more that needs to be done there.
Sure, I understand that.
But in terms of, to your point, it's typically better to have an objective diagnostic tool to, tell that someone has a concussion or doesn't, versus relying on a subjective experience or a subjective rating or
Yeah.
asking them what their last name is.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they found that you got to be careful with concussions because you get 2-3 consecutive concussions in a row, that starts increasing your chances for sudden death or really long-term effects that are irreversible. And you see that a lot with CTE
Yeah.
and in the NFL. But I'll also tell you, one of the things that were eye-opening for me was you have baseball concussive injuries, you have lacrosse concussive injuries, you have basketball concussive injuries, you even have swimming concussive injuries, as well as cheerleading. So we've been able to collect EEG across a wide array of different sports, and both male and female. And there's already been observed effects that the brain, or the male's brain, is different than the female's brain. So what a concussion might look like on a man is going to be different than what a concussion looks like on a woman.
Is there significant difference between what?
Significant differences.
That is interesting.
But
You mean the effects of the concussion in terms of brain wave activity will show up and look different from male to female?
That's correct, and that's why if you ever go through a clinical trial or something, they'll ask you, are you male or are you female, and there'll probably be some specifics to addressing that, because
I did not know that.
there's not like a one-size-fits-all treatment either, although that's what's given typically.
Yes.
But that's
yes.
why treatments probably aren't as effective as they could be.
Are there any implications to those differences? Do we know exactly what they may imply, or not? We're not there yet.
I mean, I think we're still early.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think they're looking at it significantly. I've
Yeah.
heard there's different there's structural changes that are occurring at like the women's soccer level. I know there's structural changes that are occurring at even at youth levels.
Yeah.
To start trying to.
Yes.
They know that something's happening now. It's not like people are saying, oh, every time you hit a soccer ball, that's fine. No, they're finding that there's actual
Sure.
small little
Changes.
changes, but it's not conclusive, and
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
you need funding, you need
Exactly.
actual research to go into that.
Now this device, you had to get FDA approval. Tell me about that process.
Yeah, so because this device as a hardware product serves as a traditional standard EEG, what we were able to do was take this product through a certain track, and that's known as the 510K track.
Okay.
There, you actually don't get FDA approval, you get FDA clearance, which is different. There's a little nuance there.
Okay.
Approvals typically for new, novel drugs or devices. What we were able to do was we were able to identify a predicate device, which is essentially a device that performs, or what we say performs at the same level as our product. And then we were able to do a technical performance evaluation as well as some risk management aspects. The biggest challenge to FDA is actually not the submission process, it's the testing you have to do. So there's a series of testing that you have to do for electrical type medical devices. And it's everything from looking at immunity, electromagnetic interference, and disturbances you can imagine in a hospital environment.
Sure.
There's MRI machines, there's
Sure.
a whole bunch of different computers, cell
Yeah.
phones, different x-ray
Sure.
machines. So really it's about making sure that the data isn't negatively impacted by all this other electrical activity that's happening. In addition to, taking the product through biocompatibility, making sure the glue that we're using is going to be, not irritate the skin or
Yeah.
not, cause any type of toxicity. So that probably in itself took 2 to 3 months to go through all the testing, ensure the device is safe, ensure the device performs effectively, have it done by a third-party testing company, and we actually through the testing had to change certain aspects of the product to actually meet the requirements. For instance, you don't want to be using the amplifier and then mistakenly maybe have it plugged into the charger. That can create, although it's a very small risk, it could create
Yeah.
potential electric shock risk effect. So we had to actually change the port of our product so that we made it so that if you plug the cable in,
Right.
it blocks the charge port. so that you can't mistakenly do things. So, we went through that whole process, and, even before that, we definitely had some failures with the FDA process,
Sure.
not having certain information, et cetera. So, it was definitely an iterative process, and I don't want to bore you with all the details, but essentially, we identified a predicate device, and we
Yeah.
did a certain level of testing to show that our product could perform as well or better than that product.
So you got clearance.
Correct, and we got clearance for that.
I got you.
And then we also had to say the intended use of the product as well as the indications for use. So we had to identify what type of clinical environments and what type of patient populations.
Right. If there's a movement towards these types of portable devices on a much wider scale, it's going to affect how it's used in general in terms of hospitals. It can create change in policies where right now it's interpreted by the results of EEG is interpreted by a neurologist. And even the usage, I assume, is done by a neurologist, conducted. But in the future, can you see these products speeding up a process of change where it'll be used by, capable of being used by other health professionals?
Yeah, absolutely. As well as, outside of the clinical environment in a lot of cases. What I've seen, my experience in the healthcare market and even the regulatory side is there's this push to move medicine and diagnostics to, essentially what they call real world settings.
Yeah.
You can run the most perfect study in the lab, but is that really reflective of what's happening in the real? How many people are actually going to have a seizure when they're in the hospital versus, you're driving and it might happen, or you're, outside for a walk, etc. So when we have this type of portable equipment, essentially allows us to get closer to the time of incident.
Sure.
And for seizures, for Alzheimer's, etc., a lot of that happens at the primary care level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or at the emergency department level if it's an accident or unexpected. And we were talking about this earlier. There's only 15 to 20,000 neurologists in the entire country.
Yeah.
But there's millions of people living with epilepsy. There's millions of people living with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism. There's a whole range of different neurological disorders that obviously neurology or neurologists alone can't necessarily manage. So the goal is to, you have to have neurologists in the picture, obviously.
Yeah.
There is no replacing neurologists. But what we think we can do is we can open up the ability to get EEG done as soon as possible to other clinical environments. So even if we can't get that EEG read by a neurologist, at the point of time, we can at least get the recording done at that time, and then have a neurologist later read it, and at least they're reading something that's fresh. The clinical gold standard for seizure diagnosis is 24 to 72 hours. But the typical wait time to see a neurologist is 25 days. You can't even, there's not even any equation to make that make sense.
I know. I remember my mother had Alzheimer's, and this was a while back. She died in 2002. The disease progressed slowly with her, so she went the course of a 15, 20-year process. And I remember the initial diagnosis. It was done by a primary physician, by the way. And I remember the wait in between, and when she did get to see a neurologist, it was a good, significant, I don't remember the precise number of days, but there was a significant time lapse between her actually seeing a neurologist. So, and I think at that time it was a little bit more than a month.
Yeah, and even if something is happening, you need to see a neurologist. Those symptoms might alleviate.
Sure.
Like, how many times have I been to the dentist and, that whole prior week I had this toothache, and then I'm in the dentist chair and I don't even remember which tooth it is that is, that's causing me to be there right now.
Right.
So, it's definitely an important facet of being able to speed up clinical diagnosis.
that's very, very interesting. I heard that with concussions in some cases, and tell me if I'm correct or not. That if a person is got a concussion real quick, given an EEG right away, within 10, 15, 20 minutes, you can definitely clearly see abnormal activity in the brain. If it goes past that time frame, you may see normal activity in the brain.
Yeah, the brain is very plastic, so
Exactly.
it'll normalize
Very quickly.
very quickly. It'll adapt. I mean, the human body itself will do that. You know, how many times
Yeah.
have we gotten a scratch or
Sure.
a cut? It'll heal up.
So there's plasticity, yeah.
So that's why it's important to try to get as quickly as close to the incident to see what was happening at that time before the brain renormalizes itself.
Especially with kids who the brain is still maturing. So you have a 10-year-old playing football, 12-year-old playing football, and you think the kid gets hurt, and initially you think it might be a concussion, and you send them a week or two later to have an EEG. You won't see it. Am I correct?
It'll definitely be difficult, and that kind of brings up an interesting point where sometimes it's not just about the diagnosis of the concussion, but it's about measuring the rehabilitation of the concussion. So
Okay.
when you're able to get a baseline of essentially a normal EEG, you have a snapshot of what the brain should look like.
And if that becomes a process of general health, in terms of a kid being, going for a checkup, initially you're taking the EEG to establish a baseline. If that was common practice, then for instance, if a kid got involved in some contact sport, and even if you got the EEG later, you would have a baseline to compare it against.
Correct, and that kind of relieves a lot of stress that parents might have.
Yeah.
That allows the school to kind of take a more proactive role in
Sure.
managing their students, and then it also allows for what we like to think of our products and our business as more solution oriented. So it's
Yeah.
not just to deliver this EEG product, but it's how can we improve care coordination. So what we've done is we've more so at the collegiate clinical research level, but even with schools we've done some early conversations trying to understand, do they have a school nurse, do they have a school physician, is there a local neurologist who they're already sending student athletes to, etc. So it's really about creating this kind of end-to-end solution, and for us that's using EEG and specific neurological conditions of what EEG may be applicable for.
Okay. Wow, this is very interesting. I'm going to switch topics real quick. I know your position is Chief Quality, what is it,
Chief Quality Officer.
Chief Quality Officer.
Or the neighborhood janitor.
Tell me, what does that entail?
So as Chief Quality Officer, a major activity of our company is manufacturing.
Okay.
And we can't start and do this great mission that we want to do if our products aren't of the highest quality.
Okay, got you.
And that's my plug right there. It's all about quality. How do we,
Maintain
from
that.
beginning to end? And I'm a firm believer that trash in is trash out. So what that means is, if we're designing something that's not designed properly, or if we're engineering something that's not engineered properly, then whatever we're manufacturing is not going to be manufactured properly.
You got it.
So my goal is to start all the way from the beginning of a product's development's life cycle, look at the market needs and the customer requirements, look at the design inputs, look at the engineering specs, make sure our documentation is there. You'd be surprised how many products exist that don't really even have documentation. It's just manufactured and then sold. You can do that in the consumer market. You can't do that in the medical device. There's something called the Code Federal Regulations, CFR. For a medical device, it's specifically CFR 820.
Okay.
That is a standard, that is codified regulation that comes from Congress through they passed like the Healthcare Act of 1990 something, or whatever. But essentially, it's Congress passed laws to make sure that patient safety is protected. What that requires is that a manufacturer have full traceability from every material, every supplier, every aspect of the product is documented and it's in stone.
Right.
And that if anything changes, you have to have a full change control that measures every little change, because it's a device, it's a product, it's electrical circuits, it's plastic, etc. But really, this, from in the eyes of the FDA, this device does the same function as a drug almost, or it's not, maybe not the same function, but it serves as the same type of process as a drug. It's going to influence some type of health parameter of a patient.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine if you have, a chain of pharmaceutical drugs, you're not just going to send out them. You're not just going to send them to a customer. You have to have them isolated and labeled properly, and you have to know when they were made and what ingredients are in there. And I think I've seen a lot of issues, recalls with like blood pressure medicine, etc.
Yeah.
Those all stem from quality issues.
Yeah.
Something's happening in the supply chain, something's happening in the process that's essentially reducing the quality and creating essentially risks for the patients. And then, as you know, as a manufacturer, if you have a product that's not working, you have to go through a recall.
Yeah.
There might be civil penalties, criminal penalties in some case, which we've seen with the opioid epidemics, etc. So, quality is it's not a nice to have for medical devices. You have to have quality built throughout the entire chain of the product. And so it's my job to try to make sure that happens.
Wow. Okay. Abdus, this has been very informative. I have to have you back in a year, see how far this has gone from where you're at now to where you will be 1 year from now. But time is running, and I'd like to thank you for being on the show.
All right, I appreciate it, Alfonso.
Right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed the show. It's very interesting what's happening in technology and medicine. Man, the future is coming quick. Folks, until the next time, and I'll see you on the next second Saturday.